AI in education. And Roger's here is going to try to present some of his ideas on this effort, on this matter. So I'm really pleased that Roger's here. Thank you for visiting us, and I look forward to your conversation. Roger's going to talk about for 45 minutes or something like that, and then we'll have time for questions and discussion. And there is a Zoom option. There are people on Zoom, and if you have questions, please put them down in the chat, and then we'll discuss those at the end as well. So for the people on Zoom, you can do that. So Roger, welcome. We're really pleased that you're here visiting us at MSU. So take it away.
Oops, oh my gosh. That was a robot arm. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Joe, for your introduction. It's wonderful to be here. It's been a wonderful day. Look forward to also tomorrow interacting with so many of you, and this is such a wonderful opportunity. And you know, thank you again for being here, and thank you to the search committee. So the presentation is kind of broken up into two parts. The first part is really kind of an overview of the research that we've been doing in terms of the area of AI in education, coming at it from a psychologist perspective. And then we'll switch into center modes and talk specifically about some of the ideas that we have for the center that would be called potentially MetaLearn. MetaLearn, think of play on words. It's learning about learning. It's not just about learning science or chemistry or biology or engineering, but learning about learning, how do we use that, and then how do we use AI to do that. And we'll talk a little bit more as we decompose the concept of MetaLearn as a framework for the vision. So first half, a lot of our research that we do focuses on self-regulated learning. So as a psychologist, we are interested in how students of different ages basically self-regulate. What does that mean? How they monitor and regulate their cognition, affect, metacognition, and motivation, in some instances social processes. Right? So during the talk, I'll be using SRL, or self-regulated learning, and metacognition interchangeably. Okay, and multimodal data. So yes, as a psychologist, we collect learning outcomes, performance measures, errors, etc. But what really focus is, and self-report measures, not to forget those, but what we have been doing for over 20 years is collecting multimodal data. So when the student is performing, learning, reasoning, we're collecting eye tracking data, facial expressions of emotion, physiology, log file data, so anything they're doing with a game or simulation or immersive environment is being collected at the millisecond level so that we can take each of those data channels and either individually or combined make inferences about the development of self-regulatory processes, why they're not reasoning, why they're not problem solving, and why they're not, for example, academically achieving. Okay? So that's a little bit. And so I'll talk about some of the trials and tribulations of our research, right? I'm also the cluster lead scientist for the Learning Science Cluster, and our research is, this research is extremely expensive to do, okay? As you all know, as everybody frowns, oh no, it's going to cost a lot. Yes, a little bit, okay? So I spend a lot of my time as a lead scientist writing grants. Most of our research, our 12 grants right now are funded by NSF, Department of Education, IES, NIH, and then other agencies such as CAFTRS, which is for pandemic decision making, and Army Research Lab, because we do have the 5 branches of the military that's around our building, if you will, not in a military way, but in terms of research and development. And then also by Europeans such as Early and the Jacobs Foundation, and some of the work that we are still doing with our colleagues and collaborators nationally and internationally is still funded by some of the Canadian funding agency when I was a senior research chair a couple of moons ago. So with that in mind, just an overview. So there is a science of learning when we do educational technology. We're not doing fuzzy wuzzy was a bear in terms of intuition-based design. It is based on the science of learning. Okay, it is based on the science of learning with advanced learning technology, self-regulation, as I mentioned. And then what we want to figure out is if the student, for example, is not able to self-regulate or has challenges regulating, okay, then the question is what can we do to facilitate that in terms of AI? So what role does the AI play? Is it a pedagogical agent? Is it an assistant? Okay, is it an external regulator, etc.? And then what I'll do is give you a little flavor of some of the projects that we are doing right now, because those are the projects that we're going to leverage partly for the center if ... Okay? So, as a good psychologist, we started theories and frameworks of self-regulated learning. We always look at context, right? We look at multiple contexts, whether the human is instrumented, right, where we have experimental rigor, okay, and control over everything, so we like to think, of course, right, in the lab, but we also do cognition in the wild, in the classroom, middle school, high school, in the clinic, where we have clinicians who are basically trying to save a pediatric acute patient, okay, etc. And we use the different types of technologies, as you will see, games, intelligent tutoring systems, multimedia, hypermedia, okay, and then we'll talk about some new work on human digital twins. Can we replicate humans, okay, as external regulators, but also as models of who we are as self-regulated beings. And then, of course, the measurement, right? Of course, prior to, during, and following, we're going to focus on the during, which is the online trace data. And then, of course, this is the bottleneck that sometimes created, is how do we analyze these complex data channels, right? Imagine you have an eye tracker that operates at 500 hertz. That means for a student, that means they're collecting 500 data points, right, for 1 second, versus a physiological device that may be doing 30 hertz. Okay, so what inferences can I make at 30 hertz, let's say 1 second or over time periods, versus 500 data points in 1 second? All right, so that has a lot of impact in terms of how we analyze that data, but then what inferences do we make about that data, and then how AI can play a role in supporting those processes. All right, and then yes, and then we make the system more intelligent, and then, you know, this is the part we have to really work on, is kind of explaining and extending some of our theories and frameworks. So, as a good psychologist, we are dealing with psychological constructs, SRL. So, what is self-regulated learning? Okay, how do we measure it? How do we analyze it? And because we're in the School of Modeling and Simulation, and this is also very important for the center, is that we're not only taking that data to understand self-regulation to make these systems adaptive, how do we take some of that data and can use it to model self-regulatory processes for the learner? So if I'm collecting your eye tracking data, you are generating a heat map which tell me about your attention allocation. Can I use that as feedback for the learner, as opposed to just telling you, hey, you didn't look at the right thing? Well, that doesn't really help me much, okay? And then simulate. So we talk about simulated students. Can we generate 1,000 simulated students with different individual differences, skills, knowledge, etc., and can we run these simulations to actually see how these students would perform in a particular task and under particular instructional conditions? So this is what a typical student looks like. This is a student that's fully instrumented in our lab, so the kinds of data, we'll come back to this. Sometimes we're in the classroom and there's no other place to collect the data, so we're actually in the class while the teacher is teaching, but of course he's got headbutt earphones, so of course he's not being disturbed. Okay, the issue of scaling up, how do we take this kind of technology, okay, which is very expensive at the one-person level, and scale it up into the classroom? What decisions that we need to make as researchers to still understand how they self-regulate, but then what is the role of AI? Okay, when, for example, in some of our cases, parents and some school districts do not allow us to collect physiological data on children. Most parents do not allow, when we give them choice, to have us collect facial expression data on their kids. Makes sense, I got a kid, I don't want anybody collecting data. Okay, so when you start minimizing the amounts of processed data, what does that do in terms of your ability to really understand this concept of self-regulation as you're starting to build AI tools? And in some cases, we got students. She's got a facial EMG, so they're basically collaborating together. They're learning with a high-fidelity clinical mannequin. Okay. So, I'm not going to bore you. This is not a class. Today we're talking about models of self-regulated learning. No. Okay. All to say that we are the chameleons, and therefore, because we deal with self-regulation across so many different contexts, so many different types of learners and domains, we borrow from different disciplines. Okay. We borrow from educational psychology, we borrow from the new model of SSRL, or socially shared regulated learning. We borrow from clinical psychology and neuroscience, so James Gross at Stanford, for example, emotional regulation studies. So if we know that a student is actually experiencing lots of negative emotions and they're prolonged and they're interfering with learning, then the question is, would we be able to use AI to teach them emotional regulation strategies? What does that look like? Okay. And of course, we go back to metacognition, metamemory, okay? The Mellon Gracer's model of affective dynamics, which is based on the Piagetian model of simulation equilibrium. And then also Klaus Scherer's model, computational model. And because we're doing AI, what people have not been doing, which we would propose for the center, is that any AI agent that we build has also a metacognitive architecture. I'm sure those of you are familiar with cognitive architectures like Anderson's ACT-R theory, Sortek from Ewell, etc. There was a particular model of metacognition that we could potentially embody and populate and test both computationally and its impact on students and the artificial agents themselves. Okay? So this is collaboration with Caro, who's actually in Columbia at this point in time. Most of the folks, what happens with these cognitive architectures, they tend to retire, and then if they don't have any postdocs or grad students who continue their work, then it goes away. Don't do that. Okay? So, in terms of our literature, in terms of advanced learning technologies that have been used specifically for self-regulated learning. The question is, how many are there? So this is the ones that you will see most of that have been published and used with students of different types. And the question is, where's the AI in here? So we'll have MetaTutor that we developed over 15 years ago when I was still at the University of Memphis in psychology in the FedEx Institute of Intelligent Systems. That has multiple agents. We'll come back to that. This one teaches students about cognition and metacognition. They have different agents, okay? And they're learning about human circulatory systems. So there are certain behaviors that we look for that students either enact or don't enact, okay? And particular choices in instructional decisions they make that trigger the pedagogical behavior of these agents, okay? Another one, my former advisor at McGill, who just retired, Sulajwa, she's looking at self-regulation, but in medical students. So here's BioWorld, and this one has been used with medical students to teach them basically how do you, what kinds of questions would you ask a patient? What's relevant in a patient record? We've also used extensively James Lester. Here's a game-based learning environment. In this one, there is no AI. You are dumped on this, sorry, that's a really harsh term. You are dumped on this island, okay, as a participant, as a student, and there's been an outbreak. And by the way, this is pre-COVID. Okay, so you as a learner, you get to talk to the nurse, talk to the patients, talk to the scientists, etc. And it's basically looking at scientific reasoning. And the question is, what are the self-regulatory processes that students use when you have an open-ended environment, right? Compared to here, if you do something that is not expected, and we think your metacognition is an issue at hand, Mary the monitor will pop up. Here, you have no support. There are non-play characters, but they do not have any AI, okay? And then we have Gautam Biswas, our colleague here. They're using learning by teaching paradigm, okay, where the kid is learning about ecology. And what they're doing is, it starts off with Betty having nothing in her brain, so blank canvas. And based on what they learn about ecology, they start populating Betty's brain based on concepts of nitrates, phosphates, and the relationships. And then kids ask questions to figure out what's relevant or not. And then our colleague Matsuda at NC State now, he was a postdoc at CNU, is that this is a completely different approach. With this environment, the AI is the machine learning that's behind the scenes. So this thing does not know how to solve algebra problems. The students teach it how to solve algebra problems. So you can see the problems. So you can teach it wrong procedures, etc. Okay, so there's a human loop. So the question is, and of course this one here, Phil Winnie's extensive work over the last 2 decades that basically is done for, it's a system for studying. And the assumption that Phil and his colleagues make is that when a student highlights text, and you can put any kind of text in here, okay, any kind of content, is that the assumption is the student is monitoring and found something so important that then now they're highlighting and they make it into their notes. Okay, so different approaches to instructional decision-making, self-regulation, and AI. Okay, so part of this is, for the center, is leveraging some of this and going beyond, and we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. So back to the MetaTutor. So we actually, after 15 years of research, we actually published in Frontiers in Psychology 2 years ago, and my co-authors in alphabetical order are former postdocs and grad students who led all these papers, conference papers, and publications on MetaTutor. There are now faculty members in different departments, computer science, learning science, ed psych, etc., all over the world. And then this MetaTutor has actually morphed into these very two-dimensional haptic agents that really give you no affective engagement, right? To more where we actually hire actresses. Okay, so this is, yes, she looks a little beakish, little canary. Okay, so we actually hire actresses where we're looking to see if it's more engaging to have the female version of that, or can we have the morph version of that? And she uses facial expressions to trigger metacognitive aspects. So that if we can detect that you're not reading, you didn't read the whole question, the science question, then she will change her facial expression to indicate to you that maybe you're not, maybe you want to rethink what you're doing, right? So just basically, again, to trigger metacognition. Again, here's the scenario that you saw. So in terms of experimental setups, right? Depends if you're going to a classroom. So typically with kids, it would be basically think aloud protocols, if we can get the kids separated enough, log file data, and maybe facial expressions of emotion. And of course, in addition to learning outcomes, self-report measures, etc. Here's one where we're testing EEG in terms of the cognitive load induced on a teacher who is looking at multimodal data of students. So the question is, what should actionable data visualizations look like if they're going to be effective for teachers in the classroom in real time or near real time? Here's a kid with an embedded, obviously you can't see it, but there's an embedded eye tracker, so we're trying some of those techniques. Here with our Nemours Children's Hospital, so the mannequin here, the baby, it's basically a premature baby. It's an acute pediatric scenario, and it's been designed in such a way that we're looking at clinical decision-making and self-regulation in the team performance, because if they do not operate, then this baby will die. And then the question is, so part of this is learning to deal with acute patients and the fact that time is of the essence, right? And then the second part of this is how do we train certain medical professionals for dealing with death, okay, in terms of emotional regulation. And then we have some other techniques, technologies such as tangible landscape that involves gaming and simulation to this part. So here's a student, right? So here she is, synthesizing new chemical compounds. She is in a chemistry lab. Here, output of what she's seeing in her visor, right? And we're asking very basic questions. These are basic fundamental learning questions, right? Is she learning? What is she learning? She's not verbalizing. All we see is this, right? So we're working with computer science and engineering colleagues to basically look at embodied cognition that may be indicative of efficacy in certain specific strategies, right? So there's a thing called jerk, right? This means that self-efficacy of that particular strategy that is embodied through your hands is not as effective versus a more smooth contours, okay? And that's partly using machine learning. Bigger question is she going to retain any of this? How much do we have to spend on changing some of these curriculum units into VR, and what is really the return on investment, if you will, and not in terms of just research, but really return on investment in terms of funding and transferring these skills. So to give you an idea of eye tracking data, so here is an example of a student. This is talk about coordination. Sorry. So here is gaze behavior of a college student reading part of a text on viruses in Crystal Island. Okay, so here's the question. So this is the data that we collect. This data generates CVS files. It creates a whole bunch of data that we use with traditional statistic methods, machine learning, etc. The question is, what about if we actually, as part of the intervention, is have an AI not only see this, right, make inferences about this to provide adaptive scaffolding and feedback, just like a teacher would do, or a parent, or a faculty member, right? But then also use this to have students confront their own data, right? So instead of saying, well, you still don't understand the difference in viruses and bacteria, because show me my data, okay? So using the multimodal data as also part of the educational intervention. Here's another one. This is an IES project the University of Georgia just ended. In this case, we worked with psychometricians, okay? And, oops. Oh, wow. That was fast. We saw all that, right? So let's play this again. So in this case, we're looking to see, can we pick up gaze behavior patterns, right? So the student has to read, this is a statistical reasoning problem. They have A, B, C, D. One of these is the correct answer. The other three are misconceptions that are found in the statistical reasoning literature. The question is, can we use gaze behavior to be predictive of whether they're going to get the right answer, or to be able to detect a misconception? If we can do that, then imagine having an AI actually do the intervention and explain. The question though is, would it show you the gaze behavior of the student himself or themselves, of an expert, a teacher, or would you do a more static version, which is here the dynamic version, a static version of this is another student, two different problems. Here's the dispersion of the student's heat map. This student got the right answer. Okay, the answer is D. Look at where they focus their attention versus the same student on another problem where this student is all over the place and did not even answer the question, right? So can we use these kinds of multimodal, multi-channel data not only for predicting different aspects of learning and self-regulation, but also then what role can AI play as they interpret these, right, in real time or near real time, but then also as the adaptive learning tool that comes for scaffolding and feedback. Here's another version of, this is with the College of Medicine. This is an undergrad student, okay? And we get to see, they pulled up the chest x-ray, we get to see the examining the chest x-ray. We also instrumented the mouse, so the mouse movements are really important. There are the 5 cases, and what you're seeing at the bottom here, okay, is not an EEG, it's based on the video feed in real time of their facial expressions. It's the probability of different affective states, whether it's confusion, frustration, etc. And so we asked the question, right, to look at clinical decision making and reasoning and diagnostic errors, what data channel is the most predictive, right? Is it the facial expressions? Is it the eye tracking data? Is it their screen recording? And what I've done in this scenario is actually shut off the concurrent think aloud protocol, so you're not really getting full context, and I did that on purpose. So imagine what you get without verbalizations, okay? So in terms of other projects, right, because we have limited time, so we do have an existing NSF grant with NC State in terms of we have colleagues in computer science and STEM education looking at data visualizations of teachers, okay? So data visualizations of student self-regulatory processes, right? So imagine in the future, to be part of the center, is you have a data visualization where we provide near real-time data visualization of, let's say, students' affective states. So we work with the teachers in terms of what data would you want to see, how do you want to see it, when do you want to see it, and guess what? Towards the end of the project, after that, is we also instrument the teacher. Because you ask for those data visualizations, we provide those in real time. The question is, are you paying attention to them? Well, how are you analyzing them? What inferences are you making? And does that change your instructional decision making? And this can be used K-12, K-16. We have another project which is Department of Ed, is kind of imagine what does the future classroom look like? Okay, what is the role of humans, students, teachers, okay, and the roles of AI? In terms of another project that we have, an international project that's funded through the Jacobs Foundation, is basically learning. These kids are 12 to 16-year-olds, and the idea is learning about AI with AI for a future with AI. Okay. So then does that mean that the AI is as a content area? Is that STEM? Is that something different? Okay. How do we treat that? How do we come up with measures to measure students' understanding of AI concepts? Okay. And then some of the other, this is just a snippet of some of the other games that are funded by NSF and NIH and IES, is for microbiology, sustainability, and parallel programming in computer science, is that all these systems, and you've seen Crystal Allen before, a little snippet, is all these systems have an architecture that's behind the scenes that drives the AI, or the AI-ness of it, in terms of what kind of feedback, what kind of intervention does it do? The question is, well, how come we're not doing what I'm sitting there as a learner, I'm getting this feedback, etc., but like, I don't understand why you're giving me that feedback. So one of these things is Judy Kay, who's at the University of Sydney, talking about open learner models. The system has a belief about the learner. For example, MetaTutor, the reason why Mary the monitor is coming up and down telling me to do something about my metacognition, whether it's modeling or scaffolding, etc., is because there's an assumption at the system level about my metacognitive processes. Well, let's turn that around and come up with data visualization so students can start understanding the systems, the AI systems' beliefs about who they are as learners, and more specifically about the specific self-regulatory processes that they have. And one of them is just inspectable. Oh, so you're giving me this metacognitive feedback because you think I'm not really good at metacognition, to put it bluntly. But then, can we get to the other point where the most sophisticated is negotiable? Fine, you are giving me your belief about who I am, you the system about who I am as a learner. You know what? I disagree with you. So allow me to manipulate and change your belief about me, and let's continue. So there's some kind of interaction between the human and the machine, so the machine basically is not always overriding the human, because the machine is not always perfect, as we know. So yeah, there'll be a pretest. Blink, do not blink. Yes, so this was done on purpose. This is a very busy, very, very busy on purpose. So after 2 decades and a half of collecting this multimodal, multi-channel data, okay, what I wanted to impress on you is the processes. So in red are the data channels. So from eye tracking data, for example, we can look at cognitive processes. For each one of these, there are multiple, and this is just a snippet of the types of metrics that we can collect in real time or near real time. Okay, and then the question is the inferences that we're making as scientists, okay, either through statistics or qualitative analysis, any other kind of analysis of these types of data. Okay, this is just a snippet. What's missing here, not to overcrowd this and make it 6 point, is then what would be the AI's intervention for each of these? Okay, so you can imagine creating basically an nth-dimensional matrix that basically drives the AI. Okay, and so one question is this specific only to STEM? would this be specific only to, let's say, biology and games? Or what part of this, back to the MetaLearn, what part of this is specific to learning in general as we teach and train humans to learn? Okay. So this basically takes us down and related to the, so we want to understand each process, the multimodal data, the analysis of these data, okay, the prediction. We're also in a state of our science where we're in the business, we're collecting these data and we're starting to analyze these data even after 2 decades, and we're in the business of we can describe and we can kind of explain, but here's the frustration. We want to predict. How much data do I need to collect on each student, of each data channel, over how much time to be able to predict things like, you know, like Lisa would be interested, self-efficacy, that I would be interested in, metacognitive skills, right? Affect regulation, okay? Those kinds of things. And then, so part of the pillars that you'll see in a couple of slides is that generative AI and explainable AI and computer, natural language processing and computer vision are also part of these potential solution and pillars of a center. So yes, as you can tell, these are professional actors. Please don't laugh. These are my grad students. They're very happy. Okay. So you can see, especially Nick, yes, with his cockatiel hair. Yes. So what we're trying to do is, part of the approach to designing AI systems is, Michelle here is representing your typical student. She's instrumented, so let me just start by playing this while I talk over it. So she's representing the typical student, okay, that you've seen, okay. She's instrumented, of course, for, yeah, there she is. Wow. She needs to go back to acting classes. It took a little too long to move. So she's representing typical students, and this is the data that we've been collecting that I've been showing you, right, in different contexts. What we want to do is, why are we not then what Nick is representing, and of course they would be physically separated, right? He's representing a researcher. It can be one of us. It can be a teacher, the tutor, the trainer, and he's fully instrumented, okay? So imagine what kinds of data would we get and be able to gather if we had experts, okay, multimodal data, while they're watching multimodal data of a student, either in real time, like we're trying to model here, or it can be data that's been collected, right? In that case then, is this going to be the new model of AI systems and agents, okay? Does that make sense? So the next thing that will be here is that we would have, for example, human digital twin that will be talking about watching all of this, okay? Here's another example. So in terms of simulated students, we've worked with several companies. This is a company, software company out of California, where basically they're using this for teacher training. Okay, it's almost like Teach Live that also exists at UCF for learning disabled students and teachers who are going to be specialists in learning disabilities. The question here is, hey, we want to take real students and their SRL profiles. Let's create profiles. Let's then embed each of these students has a simulated student with a particular profile. Okay, and then the question is, imagine now having a teacher being able to try to detect the self-regulatory challenges that these students have. And then the question basically is, how do they intervene? Also related to this, that's going to be part of the center vision, as you'll see in a few minutes, is an immersive environment. This is part of our Department of Education. So I actually pay $200 rent for a virtual space every month. In Verbella, yes. My wife is like, wow, you have another residence that I don't know about? I go, yes, it's virtual, and it's only for research. Okay. So here's a campus with many different aspects of this, right? And the question is, imagine these having agents, a metacognitive agent, a motivation agent, you know, an affective agent, etc. And so the question is, can we have students develop their own human digital twins, and their twins actually would live in this environment, and this will be for multiple purposes. It can be used, let's say in the metacognition room, for teaching how to engage in metacognition, right? Collecting the types of data that we collect to communicate, right, with other agents. And then the question is, can they actually articulate and explain what they've seen about you? Because let's say you're a student who's been using the system for 3 months, right, in your physics class. And the question is, what kinds of data have we been able to collect? And over 3 months, for example, what inferences can we make? And can they articulate and make you a better learner? The other issue is, especially in our location of Central Florida, right, in terms of underrepresented minorities, and especially women in STEM, that's why I have the extra M there, right? So you have a high school student, right? This is a proposal that's still under review. So think about a Fortnite type environment, game environment, right? Got a student, she has developed a virtual version of herself as a clinician, right? So there's identity, etc. And she's learning clinical skills. Okay? As she's learning clinical skills over time, right? And because she's instrumented, guess what? She's leaving residue. She's leaving residue, for example, over eye tracking data. Can we start using this data now also as ways of assessing, coming up with new ways of assessing the development of skills and the accuracy of skills? Okay? And this is just a little snippet of the types of data. As you can see, that tons of data will be collected from self-report measures, learning measures, okay, and of course using the system, right? And then this is one of our new projects, NIH CPUF grant with the University of Idaho, which happens to be one of the F-score states. And this one is to teach students about pandemics, so systems thinking, and I'll just let the video, see if I can play the video here.
It is intended to help identify and correct user misconceptions related to infectious disease and public health. The user can select preset model parameterizations for known pathogens or customize the parameters however they like. The user begins the outbreak at any location on the interactive map. Our simulation runs epidemiological compartment models on spatial population data, allowing movement of infected individuals between grid cells. Models can be spatially modulated by additional GIS data layers of environmental and social variables, such as topography, water bodies, vaccine hesitancy, and access to healthcare. Here, we show a brief example using a fictitious virus that turns humans into zombies. We assume that the virus transforms an infected person into a shambling undead who can infect other people through bites and travels only by foot. The intensity of the red color represents the relative number of infected zombies. Yellow indicates exposed individuals who have been bitten but not yet turned. Black shows regions of the map that have become depopulated. We see that our model predicts a pretty dire outcome for the eastern part of the United States, but the west remains unharmed and the infection burns itself out after about 90 days. Roughly 218 million people have died, about 72% of the US population. Alternatively, here is what happens if we let our zombies get on board planes. We plan to develop an AI-based narrative agent for the simulation that can identify misconceptions held by a user and customizes their interaction options to best facilitate remediation for that individual.
So given the complexity of systems thinking and all the data visualizations that are generated, the idea is to use, of course, not only machine learning, but AI agents, such as borrowing from Epic's metahumans, okay, as external regulators for scientific reasoning and making inferences about the pandemics. So here's a typical student, college student, with a think aloud. He's fully instrumented. Okay, he's setting up the model. Okay, and then I'll just kind of fast forward this. Okay, so we get the human digital twin. Right. So this is also showing the evolution of our agents. We've gone to very two-dimensional haptic agents that show no affect, to three-dimensional, to different types of non-player characters. We just got funded from the university and also Department of Defense to look at this. So we are kind of coming up with a specific experimental paradigm to start looking at human digital twins, because hey, if an engineer can have a digital twin of a tank or a turbine engine or a motor, why can't we have human digital twins of humans, right? So here's coming up with a specific research paradigm where basically you have a student that you've seen here, fully instrumented. You would have a teacher who's actually helping in real time. And guess who's behind the scenes is one of us, potentially, the researcher, okay? Trying to analyze and make inferences about the multimodal, multi-channel data. And of course, I don't have time to unpack this, but basically this shows the types of data that we would collect from the different types of humans that would then be fed, if you will, into a human digital twin, so that it actually becomes a replica of who you are as a learner, okay? And I'm gonna leave it there because time is running out, and this takes about at least 50 minutes to unpack, okay? So working on models, so these could be models for developing the human digital twin that could be part of the center, okay? And then some of the human digital twin projects in terms of dealing with societal challenges. So here we have Megan. Megan is one of my current postdocs. We actually have created a digital twin with our College of Health Professional Sciences. We have a digital twin of Megan, okay? So this Megan could be a student in terms of learning STEM, okay, where this entity actually has more knowledge or less knowledge, the same knowledge, but also thinking about in terms of clinical applications. Imagine Megan has just been diagnosed with pre-diabetes, right? And this human digital twin not only has your learning data, but it has your medical data. So now, imagine being able to project into the future. Show me what I look like if I do not change my lifestyle, my eating habits, etc., exercising. What's going to happen to me? At what point do I become diabetic? When I do become diabetic and I continue still not to change anything in my life, what's going to happen? Am I going to see you in a couple of years with, an amputation, blind in one eye, etc.? So using this in terms of clinical reasoning to also accelerate clinical reasoning across different clinical aspects. Okay, so in terms of disease progression, etc. Could also be a teacher. Right? We've been talking to our faculty in school communication disorders that deal with students with learning disabilities in STEM, right? So this could be a teacher learning how to interact with a student, right, who's a digital human who has, let's say, is on the spectrum, right? What does that look like? All right. We had other environments that we were thinking. So part of the human digital twin, so you can do live beaming into the thing, or you can actually create cases that can come back. The idea is how can we use AI to actually make this thing more intelligent and we'll keep learning about you. Okay. In other cases, here's physical therapy, Dr. Tucker with some of the physical therapy students. They're immersed in 3 walls of projection, okay, and they're basically learning how to manipulate a premature baby. So it's a lot of psychomotor skills. And the question is, how do we analyze that kind of data? We submitted a patent for coming up with the immune preceptor of a nurse practitioner. She is obviously watching, she's the expert, basically coach, etc. Can we use a digital twin so she doesn't have to verbalize the same thing over and over again, okay? And this is some of the data, yeah, so we also use, in terms of medical training, medical education, right, is using extended reality for combat medics, okay, where you can pretend you can be in this room and pretend to be in a military zone, and you're learning how to do a tourniquet, etc. Okay, so again, thinking about time, so we asked a lot of important questions, okay, the most important is, can they reflect on learning eventually, right, what is the role of AI, and of course, a lot of fundamental questions, and this is kind of also the lynching point for the second part, which will be a little shorter on the center, right, what does it mean to be intelligent, and of course, never to forget that we are dealing with lots of ethical, moral, social, economic, and societal challenges, not to mention privacy, etc. So, contributions, we're not going to go through that. Lessons learned, current work, those are a list of some of our current collaborators across the world. And of course, this work is not possible without a tremendous amount of interdisciplinary collaborations from different institutions you see, and disciplines and researchers. Okay. And so we get to this, the MetaLearn. So what is MetaLearn? So MetaLearn, again, thinking about learning about to learn, okay, Center for Symbiosis. We want to make sure that it's not AI-dominated symbiosis, meaning that humans and machines, i.e. AI, should be living together, okay, in a very symbiotic relationship. So one does not dominate, one does not take advantage of the other, etc. Okay. So the vision is we want to revolutionize education and AI through different advances, right, in science, technology, innovation, leadership, policy, and practice. The mission is to foster, right, fostering AI inclusive technologies across K-16, tasks, domains, contexts, and extending and working on this concept that would make us unique, okay, compared to, for example, the current NSF AI institutes that are funded by NSF and IES. And the objectives, right, advancing the science of learning in K-16, AI. There's a commitment to MetaLearn, which is roots in self-regulation, right, and multimodal data, in addition to all other types of data. Developing new and existing and extending existing AI-based learning technologies, right? Integrating the principles of self-regulation, leveraging, as you saw in these examples, multimodal data, okay, because that's extremely important not only for the AI development, but also for the instructional development, and creating this living lab, which I'll talk about in a second. So again, there's a mission, societal and educational challenges related to AI in education in STEM. Focus areas I mentioned is that the MetaLearn, right? We're going to emphasize the concept of MetaLearn, so the monitoring and regulation and adjusting, right? Because a lot of models talk about monitoring and regulation, but then does the student actually adjust? That's kind of that reflective process, okay? Yeah, interdisciplinary approach, partnerships, I'm going to go through this in a couple of slides. Training and education, of course, committed to training the next generation of researchers and educators and leaders in the field of AI and ed. Ethical and social impact, anything we do should have a social impact. It's got to be human-centric, okay, and responsible. And then, of course, not just be national leader, but actually, I was going to say take over the world, but let me take that back. A global leader, global center for AI in education, okay? So, same thing, center key objectives, pragmatic, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary opportunities for research, right? And what we're also producing, would be producing is not only new innate, but new methods, techniques, findings, principles, and best practices, okay? National, international leadership, right, in these areas, designing and redesigning, collaborative partnerships, training design generation, and then I have a slide where I actually expand on the living lab, right? We're no longer just going to a school or having people come into a lab or a clinical setting collecting data. It's a living lab that is ubiquitous. It is a state-of-the-art research, teaching, learning, and assessment facility that is constantly on collecting data. So while we might be sleeping here, for example, right, in Australia, let's say our partners will be collecting data, okay, or contributing to the development of human digital twins, etc. Okay. So in terms of a diagram, okay. So the vision is at the core, right, is the science of learning. So the MetaLearn is self and other monitoring and regulation adjusting of the CAMS processes. We have humans, learners, who are in schools, out of school, and living lab. And then what we're doing is not only trying to induce, detect, track, model, foster, simulate, reflect, and transfer. Those are the key processes underlying self-regulation that would make a complete, if you will, learner. Okay, so this is both for the AI-enabled technologies and also for the learners to learn. All right. In terms of core AI methods, right, in terms of ethics, we have metacognitive architecture, NLP, machine learning, computer vision, Gen AI, XAI. And then what we would be developing also that is different, okay, are these enabled MetaLearn environments. So we have the concept of living lab for research, teaching, and learning and assessment. We will continue, obviously, this is just a snippet of the types of data, the multimodal data, okay? And we're not going to throw the baby with the bathwater out. So we're going to use existing technologies that you saw, okay, that I have used, that you may have used, and our national collaborators have used, right? Virtual worlds, etc., intelligent virtual humans. But what would make us special also is the human digital twins aspect and the fact that we would have simulated students, okay? And this basically feeds both use-inspired research and foundational research in AI, keeping the core, the psychology of learning, okay? So again, MetaLearn, we talked about that. I want to mention some of the methods and techniques that we use. This is where the interdisciplinary nature is extremely important. Of course, self-reports, but participatory design, we need more time series design. We need more longitudinal studies, ESM, computational modeling, of course, agent-based modeling, human digital twins, and simulated students. There are also research methodologies and other analytic techniques that we see across different literatures, right? Network analysis, dynamic systems modeling. Some of my postdocs have been using dynamic systems modeling. Recently, of course, multi-level modeling. Complexity sciences is emerging, right, as especially in EdPsych. It's in the 4th edition of the Handbook of EdPsych. And then you see a lot of that in cognitive science, right, but we're just catching up to that. What is the role of these AI, okay? Are they assistants, collaborators, team members, research, okay? And then I think here at Michigan State University, there's obviously lots of opportunities for transdisciplinary. Like, so in terms of, hey, how do we bring cognitive neuroscience into the center? Okay, what role would cognitive neuroscience play? Of course, maintain leadership internationally and nationally, right, at different associations. These are the associations that we tend to go to. So we go to a lot of different communities and we publish across different communities because of the nature of the work. Present, and of course, not to forget that, you know, in terms of coming up with best practices, the what, when, how, under what conditions, for whom, and why that underline eventually MetaLearn as we grow. Collaborations are extremely important, right? Here, Michigan State University, so of course the College of Education and Natural Science, because those are the two that are leading this effort. But of course, my gosh, as I went through all the colleges, it was hard like not to include all of them, okay? So I apologize if I did not include yours in there. So my goal has always been to be truly interdisciplinary in nature. Michigan schools, nationally, right? We definitely want to embark on this. So these are the 4 NSF AI institutes that focus on K-12 or 16 and some aspect of learning, okay? So knowing all these PIs is extremely important. And then what I've listed here, these are the schools that I've known traditionally, even when I go back to being a doc student at McGill and then as a postdoc at Carnegie Mellon, these are the top schools when it comes to AI in education, so we need to foster collaborations that are synergistic with them in terms of tools, etc. Internationally, industry, okay, industry partners and businesses would be extremely important in terms of connecting to them, not only for funding, but also for resources and training. Government, and then also some national, international institutes that would be critical to be part of and partner with. In terms of design and redesign, the first two are the same. One just says existing, so this is where we would take, for example, James Lester's NSF AI Institute of Engage and basically use some of his existing systems within the Michigan State context. But also the question then becomes, can we develop new ones? What are some of the critical issues when it comes to STEM, right, at the undergrad, even graduate level in terms here at Michigan State University? So in both ways, disseminate and redesign these technologies. One of the things that I've been exposed to is the generation of patents, all right? Those are extremely critical, so those in computer science and engineering and medicine are very familiar with that. And then is there some kind of revenue in terms of generating income as you sell these technologies or come up with some kind of collaborative agreements? And what's wonderful about what you see next is this ubiquitous access to this living lab, right, that continues to be able to be, is for teaching, for learning, for assessment, etc., is this continuous dissemination and accumulation of data and long-term data, okay, with students of different ethnic, linguistic, cultural backgrounds, etc. Yes, we're not going to go through this. Just try to be as comprehensive as possible. So for training generation, right, this is your typical recruit and train high-quality scholars, maybe come up with new certificates and perhaps different tracks in AI and education, interdisciplinary research projects, experiential learning opportunities, seminars and conferences, mentorship and advising, of course. Community engagement is extremely critical, right? What I want to focus on is something that would be completely new, that being on the site visit team of all, well, most of these national AI institutes that I have not seen is the center, okay, has the sustained advanced research and development, okay. We have the potential to develop a new AI-based technologies that serve as collaborators. Imagine your collaborator, right, is one of the human digital twins that belongs to the center. This thing can not only synthesize the literature for you, and perhaps summarize without hallucinating. We're not talking about LLMs, okay? When it's of its right mind, okay? But be actually a research assistant, okay? Carnegie Mellon has just published their faculty in chemistry that just developed their own research collaborator that is an AI, okay? All right? So educators and coaches, so these would be ubiquitous intelligent digital twins that could be teachers and faculty, right? And then learners. We can have simulated learners with real or authentic synthetic data that we can generate on the fly, okay? And basically we'd be able to test different aspects of MetaLearn. So, a cool picture, okay? So the living lab, what does that look like? What is the vision for a living lab, right? It's a state-of-the-art, geographically in time, unbounded. It doesn't matter where you live and what time it is. It's available ubiquitously, it's interconnected, it's a research, teaching, learning, assessment space that has both physical setups, like Joe's Institute here, right? But in addition to that, which would be, for example, multi-purpose collaboration space, also has ubiquitous living, and it could be a, let's call it a campus, but it's more than a campus, where we have immersive collaborative spaces for virtual humans. These could be faculty who are talking about, hey, we've got a specific issue in chemistry that we need to resolve because our students are failing, for example. How are we going to address this? This can be used for teaching, learning, and research in terms of disseminating our findings, right, to a wider audience. We don't have to travel, okay, and generate income, right, because the center will have to be self-sustaining, okay, etc., or for training teachers or students. And then it'll also have things like virtual tools. So here's a student. Imagine a student in the near future, right? And this already happens. We have one lab at our university that is doing this, is a student actually developing their own human digital twin, teaching the digital twin what it knows about self-regulation and STEM. Or you can have faculty or students teaching these artificial agents, okay, how to solve a balancing a chemical equation problem, so that they could learn from the human. And then they can go off and teach, right? And of course, have embodied human digital twins. In terms of the philosophy, I'm not going to go into that. That was in my materials that I submitted. Obviously, funding is going to be critical. Part of it is in the internal funding. What kind of national agencies and foundations and private donors would we go after? International. And then to have a fully functional, truly innovative and transformative AI center, yes, there's a lot of people, don't freak out. I'm sure they think about it. That's a lot of units. I'll try to minimize the fonts so it's smaller. Just kidding. Right? So that, you know, I mean, everything from administrators, of course, AI researchers and software developers and game-based simulation designers would be part, and then of course the administrative, you know, a list of administrative staff from grants to HR to IT. Of course, part of this is me not knowing, you know, what part would come from the college, what part or the colleges, or from the departments, etc. So I try to put as much as possible, of course, and then our scientific unit. Affiliated faculty, of course, across the university from different areas, K-12 with 7 national and international collaborators, and then an advisory board of some of the leading folks, both national and international, and then it would be important to have also K-12 administrators, community leaders, state politicians, and AI business partners as part of the system. This is so this is the core, right? Part of that would be that the center would focus on 4 specific pillars: NLP, Gen AI, XAI, and computer vision. And just to give you a snippet of those, okay, so here's natural language processing, right? So where learners, imagine a system where learners and AI-enabled technologies, right, are using NLP to create plans, to articulate their metacognitive judgment. Imagine a student saying, well, I don't understand this diagram. Can you explain that to me? Oh my gosh, as a psychologist, that's like, you know, as opposed to not hearing that. Then we have to make inferences, okay? Help seeking, okay, knowledge, etc. Okay, and what I've put in here is, in terms of different contexts, is highlight basically some sample utterances of students' expression of different aspects of self-regulated learning. Okay, and what they're asking the AI to help them with. If that makes sense. Okay, right? Like, I think I understand the diagrams in this problem, but the textual description does not make sense to me. All right, well, if you utter that, in addition to all your multimodal data, what is the AI going to do for you at that point in time? Okay. Same thing here with generative AI. I think the exciting part about generative AI, Gen AI, is that imagine it can create problems, scenarios, situations for the student on the fly. These are things that perhaps are not even in the curriculum yet. Okay, the power of having an intelligent virtual human. So I try to show the dialogue. So a human, right? So basically, the student is maybe labeling the parts of the human circulatory system. It's like, all right, you got that. So now I'm going to ask you to learn about the functions. Well, after watching you for a certain amount of time, you obviously you're having difficulties. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you watch Maria. Right, Maria, and hey, hi, I'm Maria, I'm a sim student, and my goal is to model, enact, and verbalize my modeling processes for you given your current goal. Okay, let's go. Okay, all right, and so, not to read the text, but the text, the reason why there's so much text in there and it's so complex is to show you the complexity of self-regulated learning and how it can be expressed and whether we can use generative AI to solve these issues. Then there's XAI and computer vision. And again, so here in this case, I just gave you these are some potential thrusts, right, or research directions for the center. But, you know, NLP, capturing and analyzing and inferring MetaLearn processes during problem solving. We'll have access to ubiquitous external regulating agents that can model and scaffold students. Imagine I'm a student, I'm struggling still with balancing equations, right? Well, hey, we got an immersive environment, right? You're in a chemistry lab, right? And these are simulated students. So you know what, I'm gonna give up for a bit right now because I'm getting frustrated in terms of learning how to do this. I want these 2 students who have been identified, simulated students, as have better skills and knowledge, and more effective skills. Now, I want them to model and explain to me what they're doing so that I can learn. Okay. So and then here it's basically how can we take that multimodal data and use it as feedback for students, and then we're getting to the end here. The thrusts. So never forgetting that, you know, we can induce, measure, and support all the qualitative and quantitative changes. That's something that is important because we are so determined and so enamored with just looking at the quantitative nature of self-regulation. What about qualitative shifts? When do I become more efficacious by using a particular strategy? Right? What does that look like? When do I lose interest in balancing equations? Okay. Sorry, don't answer that. I see a lot of faces. Okay. And then the other thing that would be interesting is, because it's a living lab, right, is determining the context-specific multimodal data that needs to be collected for the AI agents to still make decisions and to support students' learning, right? Here we have, for example, there's that same picture, right? With each interaction and each educational experience that you have, your digital twin keeps evolving and starts talking to you about how you can transfer some of these skills to other domain topics. And here's the human digital twin, right? So they're engaging in meta reason, which is the highest level of cognition, is when the human digital twin has accumulated so much knowledge, not just about you, but other learners, etc., that is now able to explain to you, right, what it knows about you, okay, and how we can still accelerate the learning and development. So yes, success. So how do we measure success? These are some of the metrics that are also part of the vision, of course, okay. And that's it. Sorry if I went a little long. So, thank you very much.
So now we have about a half an hour for questions and discussion. So everybody throw up their hands. Questions? Comments? Namsu, go ahead.
First of all, this is amazing. So time still goes flying, and this time is so fast. I enjoyed a lot of your presentation. And then some of the parties I agree with you, and then, oh, that was my vision. So I'm really happy to see that. So I noticed the generative AI is new field, but I saw a lot of your application. Is there any kind of outcome, learning outcome or motivation outcome? You do have that kind of data?
Yes, so that was implicit in my slides, absolutely. So as we work with, colleagues in computer science, engineering, etc., machine learning and AI, so yes, absolutely. As we advance these 4 pillars, if you will, right, in that is that we're still scientists, so we'll still be collecting lots of data. Yeah, absolutely, multimodal data, self-report data, learning outcomes data, right, teacher data, absolutely, yeah.
What is the
So the idea would be to predict, right? That's what we want to get to. That's where we are as a science. That's the frustrating part, right? We can collect this data. We can describe what's happening. We can kind of explain what's happening. But when are we going to get to the prediction?
Yeah.
That's where we want to go,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
That makes sense. So like with example, the learning analytics community, it's kind of easy to do that because you're looking at log file data, right? How much time did somebody spend on this data set? Yes, that is important, absolutely. But can we use that data to predict when students are going to drop off the class? Right. So that's easy to do because that's low-hanging fruit and very easy. These data are much more complex, right? Because it's talking about emotions. Am I ever going to be able to emotionally regulate, right? Or every time I see physics, because I have a history with physics, so that's not me talking personally, right? But if it's chemistry or biology, then, I can handle that, right? Calculus is challenging. So how do we deal with those issues? If that makes sense, right? And what I find is a lot of the work that's been done is trivializing the complexity of humans. Does that make sense, right? So if you look at pre-test and post-test, great, that's wonderful. What happened during, right? That's where the meat and potatoes are. Right, so if we want AI agents in the future to be able to provide that in real time or near real time, then it can't just be based on pre and post, if that makes sense. Right? Pre and post are always important. Right? Sorry.
So I think I also saw, please go for it. I think I saw Barbara had a question. Go ahead, Barbara.
Barbara.
Well, thank you for a really fascinating talk. This was absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
I just have one question.
Yes.
So, in all these kinds of generated twins, how do you determine the validity of your twin? So, in other words, how do you know that what you're dealing with is really a vision of yourself? And if you haven't inputted something into this twin that is not necessarily who you are, or you've imagined a different person.
A different person,
that you
absolutely.
want to make into your twin.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great fundamental question that also needs to be addressed. That could be one of the research thrusts of the center, right? Because even as learners, like when you're doing a self-report measure, right, are you really, what about social desirability? right? Or even multimodal data. So for example, when you have clinicians who are experts, they're doing their best job to regulate their emotions, and they're not going to bleed through their face. And that's exactly what we want to capture, but you can control that, right? So absolutely, yeah. So the veracity and the accuracy of that data that's inputted is extremely important.
And so when you talked about Carnegie Mellon, that they had a research associate, Dr. Kemp, I was wondering about that because I was trying to imagine in myself if when they created that kind of a person, what kind of a person would give you back that kind of information? Like, did they create that person just to be able to give you, I don't know, information that, you know, you might want to get from a library or from reading a bunch of journal articles or something that you knew how to do in terms of computation? But that's what I kept wondering. Like, how big is the scope? How real is the scope? I could imagine seeing somebody who has this kind of a diet. If you keep that kind of a diet, this is what's going to happen to you. If you do no exercise and you sit all day long, look what's going to happen to you and your kids. Though that I can understand. But these other ones seem so much more complicated and interesting.
They're complicated, yeah. So right now that Human Digital Twin for Chemistry as a collaborator is basically what you said is it can synthesize the literature. Right.
That would make sense.
Yeah, it would make sense. And that would be, even for us, research, I mean, my gosh, if we had those kinds of assistants, that would be, because I can't keep up with the literature, right? So synthesizing the literature, and even imagine being able to generate, we'll call it a first draft, of even research questions and hypotheses. Imagine being able to generate new research questions and hypotheses that, even being an expert in the field, we haven't even considered, because it's able to ingest, right, and digest different sources of data from different disciplines, if that makes sense, yeah. So right now it's basically the synthesis of existing empirical literature, right? And it's the analysis of the data sets.
Because the self-regulation to me seems like that's a whole
That's-
different world
Yes,
of
absolutely.
intensive feedback and lots of kind. So you did not one that seems to me that's much more complex
Absolutely.
than the more synthesized ones of what you might get with ChatGPT or something like that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coy, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Roger, for such a great presentation. You laid out very sophisticated vision. My question is, what is the reality in a classroom in the United States, K-12 classroom right now? And then clearly there is a big gap between what we are right now and then the vision that you provided. And then what is the main hindrances or roadblockers to achieve those visions, and what is the plan to actually,
Yeah, no, great question, yeah. So we have to rethink basically, well, first of all, from a bottom-up approach is see what is available. So for example, in Orlando, we deal with everything, and I think I've explained this to some of you, but we deal with everything from, prep schools that only have 10 students and, teachers have PhDs and industry experience. And these kids are going to, Harvard and Yale, et cetera, right? Where their technology, they have the technology. In fact, their classrooms look like your center, right? And they have data visualization tools and all that, so that's easy. But then we also deal with Osceola County, for example, which is near Disney. And that's rural, that's very poor, right? In fact, they're embarrassed to show us their science labs, right? So we gotta basically accommodate. So there are different strategies. Strategies that we've developed are to basically bring the technologies to the schools, right, as part of a long-term commitment and collaboration. Other strategies, for example, with NSF, let's say your regular EHR core, which are due in October, right, is putting in something like, a quarter of the budget is for the purchase of the technologies that we not only bring to the schools, but will leave with the schools, right, after the project is done. One thing that we have to think about is if this kind of vision with this kind of ubiquitous, accessible environment is how do we start connecting, right? Do we need to bring all that technology to the classroom, right? To think about the fact that not every classroom is equipped with this kind of technology. So what are the ways to basically connect schools, right? So that we can still do our research and collaboration in schools, right? Without having the old model which, I mean, the old model is, we'd buy 30 laptops and we got to wheel in 30 laptops into a school, right, and plug them in, and then they don't work because, you don't have access to the IT person, right? Or you're trying to use a simulation and the kids shut down the system because they're all 30 kids trying to use the simulation and log in at the same time. Yeah, so how dealing with those issues. So we really have to deal with pragmatic issues. The question is coming up with an interesting and innovative way to maximize what schools and different schools already have, right? So we can continue that collaboration.
Other comments or questions?
I have two questions.
Go ahead, Ken. Oh,
Sorry.
oh, we have questions online?
I have one.
Well, we'll do Kevin, then we'll do the two online, and then we'll come back to Mark.
So, yeah, thank you for the sort of talk and the vision here of the future. I kind of want to pick up on something you said about you said minimizing the complexity of humans or something like that from pre and post test. So I agree with you, and you're collecting a lot of multimodal data here and thinking about the potential number of profiles of learners. And I don't know self-regulated learning, so maybe I'm a bit extrapolating here, but how do you think about fairness in something like that, in terms of the amount of data you're collecting and from whom and what you're trying to predict?
You say fairness?
Yeah, fairness.
Yeah. So fairness, so as a research scientist, because it's not just my immediate family, if you will, right in our lab at University of Central Florida, all our projects have collaborators, multiple collaborators and multiple postdocs, faculty members, research associates, grad students. So we are always very strategic in, when we have a project, we try to maximize the amount of multimodal data, because part of that is sharing that data with other collaborators. So for example, our computer science colleagues can take over some of the machine learning algorithms and use those, and they will get to publish those and we're co-authors. We will take more of the psychology of learning aspects, the learning outcomes, the performance measures, the self-regulation. So from fairness in data collection, we optimize that because we have a lot of, let's just call it a lot of mouths to feed, right? At the same time, it's fair, I would think, because again, human learning is complex, right? And so the question is, let's say you only collected think aloud data. What would you be missing in terms of understanding really the complete learner if you didn't collect other data that will give you data about their emotions or their motivation or their metacognition, right? So trying to basically, ultimately, is to have an understanding, but that's also a very open question. Which of these data channels do we need? Is it one? Is it multiple? For predicting specific aspects of learning or self-regulated learning, if that makes sense. And fairness in terms of also the sharing, right? Well, you think about fairness in terms of the participant, the other side of the coin, is that what you think? Or I was answering from the researcher's perspective.
Yeah, I was also thinking about the participants and maybe more about AI-based fairness for the participants.
So of course, though we'd have to put obviously safeguards because of the fairness, right, biases, etc. Absolutely, there will have to be a substantial amount of human in the loop to ensure that. Absolutely.
Nikita, the online ones.
Yes, so first question is from Amalia Da. Thanks, Roger. You mentioned several things about ethics, inequities, etc. in education. How does your work to address those?
So equity, so for example, some of our projects deal with adopting NIH's new framework of reducing systemic racism and health disparities, right? So a lot of our work, for example, is that I didn't present here, is focused on women's issues, women's health issues. So we have, for example, a team that is developing Hispanic patients, female patients dealing with postpartum depression. And they've been designed in such a way that by what they say and their facial expression and gestures, they're inviting medical students to show empathy. The idea is there's opportunities to show empathy, and if they don't show empathy, then they're basically doing, the next phase is to do some emotion regulation and empathy training, right? You said fairness?
Ethics, inequities in
Yeah.
education.
Okay. Yeah, so part of ethics, so that's the inequity from a research perspective. Inequities from a center perspective would mean that basically we're not looking at only homogeneous groups. So the work that we do cuts across races, right? So we have Hispanic students, Asian students, African American students, Caucasian students, et cetera, right? We do not isolate any students for whatever reason. So there's inclusivity in that, right? There's fairness in that because we're also interested in, for example, I grew up as a working class immigrant in Montreal, right? And when you've been stripped of everything that you've ever had, it's pretty hard, right? And you don't have role models. So we are trying to, even though, for example, we do work with advantaged students in schools, that's not really who we were trying to help. Those students don't need help. They know how to self-regulate, right? But from a research perspective, we're also very interested in how are they different, right? And not to exploit the differences, to understand the differences, and to be able to use technology to augment and support these students, okay? Students, broadly speaking. And ethics, of course, I'm a psychologist. My ethical behavior as a professional, as a researcher, is followed by, and I'll get even in more trouble, I'm an APA fellow, so we follow APA ethics guidelines. Everybody on our team, right, including non-psychologists, have to be trained. Even when you get volunteer students who come and work in our lab, the first thing they do is, do you have city training? If you don't have city training, go do the modules, get the city training. I need to see that certificate before you even step into the lab. Okay, so yeah, so ethics, absolutely. Ethics are extremely important, and then especially with a lot of this work. I go back to your question. Ethics, fairness, these are things that we need to attend to. Absolutely. Because there's a danger, right? So being where I am and the types of industries, I'll just leave it very general. The types of industry that surround the University of Central Florida, okay? There's ways of exploiting this for the dark side, if you will. But I like to think that I want to help humans, right? And I like to be very socially conscious that it's human-centric and it's to support humans and not to get rid of them, if you will. Sorry for being so blunt.
The second question is quite long from John Bourboncourt, and I apologize if I mispronounced, with College of Electrical Engineering. How do you distinguish the research done on various aspects of AI in MetaLearn versus the core topical research being done throughout many disciplines? MSU has well over 100 people doing core AI research, for example.
Yeah, that's going to take 50 minutes to answer. Yeah. So basically what I would say is the center is very specific on a specific concept, which would be MetaLearn, which is learning for learning, right? How do we teach humans to learn, which would be distinct, and all the other research institutes and centers, both here, nationally and internationally, that exist, right? Some of whom still focus on very traditional cognitive psychology aspects, such as well-structured tasks, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? Or very specific, for example, I gotta be careful with the words that I use. On well-structured tasks, I'm going to repeat that again, right? Because not every task that a student in STEM is going to be solving is going to be 22 times 22, right? We're trying to deal with how do you deal with the complexity of something that is not 22 times 22, right? And so part of this also is no one center or institute can solve all the world's problems, right? Because you're not going to have 100 researchers, right? You may have we're going to be part of a network of all these, because part of that is networks that you already have, and parts are networks that I already have, both nationally and internationally. And then as the scientific endeavor is knowing, and we do this all the time, when do we compete with others and when do we collaborate with others, right? So that's a very, very nuanced part of the roadmap. Okay.
Okay, I think Mark, and then we'll go to Lisa and Bob. Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Roger. Very interesting 50,000-foot view. Coming down a few thousand feet. Assuming you're hired and you're now the director of the center, what's the first 5-year plan?
Yeah. Okay. Well, the first 5-year plan, as I've learned today, is where's the center going to be housed? Right. So there's going to be an issue of it's not like you're going to hit the ground running. So part of this is where is the space? Understanding where the space is, what our needs are, having, of course, focus groups with faculty here, that would be obviously relevant to the stakeholders. pitching the idea, figuring out what's doable and not doable in terms of these technologies. Some are very easy to do, like, we can have walls of intelligent data visualization that can be presented, right? That can be for research purpose or training or education. But then the question is, human digital twins, what's the latest technology? So coming up with a budget that makes sense, right? We're not talking about $100 million here, never gonna be able to afford that. So what makes sense in terms of the vision of the center, right, versus the economic cost of that's gonna be initially, right? The other thing is, of course, hiring excellent people, right? So for example, we've had a miserable time. We've been trying to hire AI researchers, but these are very few people in the world that exist in the world, and they're very costly. And guess what? They don't come to work in universities. They go to industry because that's where you're making the money, right? So how are we going to offer competitive salaries to these folks to come, because they're going to be core, right? And these would be folks in AI researchers, computer scientists with computational modeling, for example. Electrical and biomedical engineers are going to be a part of this, not to mention, of course, the other social sciences and all the other sciences that I talked about. So yeah, so I'd imagine that would probably take, I don't know how long construction would take, right? But, judging from University of Central Florida, which is always under construction, it's probably going to take 2 years to have any kind of physical, right? So while the physical building is being set up, it's setting the facilities, is starting the hiring process and starting with the connections of technologies that we all have access to, engage stakeholders. So basically be able to do everything while we're literally waiting for the, let's just call it, for the building to be built, if you will. No, and it's going to be a building, right? So yeah, that makes sense. What's the budget? What's the operating budget, right? Who's going to be affiliated member? Who's going to be core members, etc. Yeah. And the stakeholders are going to be extremely important. The schools, we had a wonderful conversation at lunch, in terms of schools, businesses, industry partners, etc. And use a lot of existing data sets that we already have. In fact, we could actually close our lab right now. We would still have data for the next 10 years. That's how much data that's how much data we collect, right? We actually have more data than scientists to be able to analyze that data, right? Yeah.
Lisa.
Thanks. Okay, so my question is a little bit of a different tack, and it's just, we kind of talked about this at lunch, but I'm still trying to grapple it.
Yeah.
So, you have this multimodal intensive data that you're collecting, you're using AI to kind of think about how these tutors can be intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
But as I start to think about, how do we scale this to the broader education context? We're not gonna have kids fully wired in the classroom, right? So have you been thinking about, a lot of your work is focused on the student learner and their interaction with the tutor. But then how do we translate that into teaching teachers to detect when students need interventions, how to support their self-regulation?
Absolutely, yeah. So two points related to your question. So one is, again, because we're still in this describing, trying to understand process, we're collecting vast amounts of data. There's going to come a point where we've collected, if you will, enough data, right, to have a really good understanding, maybe not a complete understanding, that then we don't have to collect data on every human that we interact with, right? So there's that point. The question is, where is that point going to be? Is it going to be different for different tasks or domains or learners, et cetera, contexts, right? And the second question that is one of our interests, because yes, you're right, we have been focusing so much on the learner, the student. What about the teacher? So that's been an interest in terms of actually using, for example, Kramarski's SRL, but also SRT, self-regulated teaching, right? How do we teach teachers to be self-regulated learners themselves, and then bring in self-regulated teaching into the classroom? So we actually have 2 NSF grants that focus on that particular aspect. Part of that would be through the MetaDash project that we still have, so the data visualizations of teachers, but just like we talked at lunch, one of the issues is those data visualizations for teachers have to be actionable, because teachers are not taught data literacy skills in general, right? So how do we expect them to make inferences of data if they haven't been taught how to do that? So that's a hurdle. So that's one perspective. The other perspective is using systems like SimSchool, which we would be able to get access to and create those profiles to start teaching teachers, and not just teachers, but faculty also, and teaching assistants and grad students, really anybody who's interested in teaching. right? Where we can create profiles, and the question is, those profiles we can experimentally manipulate, but they can actually be profiles that are based on actual students, right? So they're not fictitious, right? If that makes sense. So there's a whole track that we are very interested, that would be the teacher training, if you will, or teacher education of self-regulation using some of these technologies.
Bob, I think you had your hand up next.
I did. I had a question from early on, right, which it seemed to be, maybe this wasn't the way it was intended, that the notion of AI interventions and self-regulation was largely a deficit model. It was to intercept when kids didn't seem to be self-regulating, and then intervene in a way to push them back, right?
Yep.
Is that really the model going forward?
No, that's implicit, yes. So that's, yes. So anytime we think, yes, absolutely. Thanks for picking up, yes. So implicitly, every time we talk about this, it's, yes, a deficit model, or it's maladaptive, right? They're not regulating. But we also want to know when they are regulating, right? Because that's also going to be data that these AI tools, enabled technologies, would know about, right? And, you know, it brings me back to the Mellon Gracer. So we talk about like confusion, right? So there's like, I think we have a natural instinct that if the student shows too much confusion, because we know there's a high probability from confusion to frustration, and if nothing is done, then it'll be disengagement. There's a natural tendency, I think, for us as researchers and educators, like, well, if there's too much frustration, we know what the path is going to be. We need to intervene. Well, look at our instructional models. I mean, they're impoverished, right? Even with all this multimodal data. So part of those best practices is, even if you have the multimodal data, right? So the student, like, think about the worst possible students. Sorry, we need to poop on students. Low metacognitive skills, low emotional regulation skills. Let's just call it, for sake of, low motivation skills. And we've identified what model of instruction are we going to borrow from to intervene? Because we don't know when to intervene, how are we going to intervene, right? And then are we going to be effective in that intervention? And using these AI tools, right, we can actually experimentally do that kind of experimentation. Does that make sense? So it's easy if you're doing 22 times 22. I'll give you an example. So within, for example, when we use intelligent tutoring systems, right? So you got 22 times 22, so the student does 0. Okay, well, that's easy for the machine, right? If they do it 0, if there's an inference that maybe they subtracted. Okay, what do they do next? Oh, then they write 0 again. My inference, the machine's inference that they're subtracting, goes up, right? But that's nothing compared to, like, how do you solve a complex, let's say, chemistry problem or physics problem, right? Where there might be multiple paths. Or, for example, in our clinical research, you put 10 experts in a room and they all have different problem-solving behaviors and paths. How are you going to account for that, if that makes sense? Right, yeah. So one thing is, yes, it is, right, kind of the deficiency model or maladaptive, but their adaptivity is extremely important because that is the hallmark, right? We want students to be adaptive, right? And then the second part is the use of this multimodal data to be able to understand that, right? And that we don't always have to intervene, right? But the question is, there's a danger as educators. If we do not intervene, then what happens to the student, right? With these AI technologies, you can then actually start having a conversation with the student. Hey, it looks like, you know, you have low this, low this, low that, right? Am I accurate? Start the dialogue because you need to get ground truth. Where are you going to provide ground truth? It's like, oh no, I'm really just getting frustrated. I didn't realize I have low motivation, or I'm just dichotomizing for the sake of simplicity. Then it starts the dialogue. So the student is not only expressing themselves, right, but also the machine then is also learning about the student and recalibrating itself. So both agents, if you will, the human and the AI agent, are self-calibrating, if you will.
Well, we come back around, right? Because the alternative model would be a more positive model where you're attempting to reinforce self-regulation rather than focus on the deficit, right?
Yes, but
where you're kind of moving that way. But that leads me into a different question.
But wait, can I stop here a second? So before we come up with a way of helping someone regulate, we need to understand why they don't regulate. That's one model. Okay.
perhaps.
Because of the complexity. Yeah.
Which raises this other interesting question. Right?
Sure.
One of the things about many of our game-like AI interventions, like deep learning, do and go, and things, was that the generative AI, in order to solve the problem, comes up with methods and approaches that humans didn't envision.
Yeah.
Right? And so the interesting question is, in this context, right, to what extent can we and will we, and do you sort of envision us allowing that kind of generative AI to not force fit existing human models, right, but to come up with new and interesting approaches that perhaps combine a positive and a deficit approach, right, or something new, right, unforeseen by us.
Yes, absolutely. That is part of the MetaLearn process. Right. So we just submitted a paper, which I mentioned to the Department of Defense, because they're obviously interested in this and accelerating military training. Right. Part of that is having the generative AI basically engage in meta reasoning, because it now has observed and interacted with other humans and other agents, that it can now come up with a new approach to, let's say, solving the problem that it has never seen. Right. So that would be really interesting. So it's actually generating a new method, right, that then we could, as humans, as educators, as scientists, determine whether that's really effective and whether a human would actually engage in that kind of behavior. Absolutely. So the generation of new strategies, if you will. Mm-hmm.
So there is one more comment and question from John Rosenborg. The comment: calibration requires honesty of response, often not the case. While the AI might detect inconsistency, it cannot substitute that with the model behavior with any degree of certainty. It's not a question.
Yeah. Well, that's part of this whole enterprise, is to look at that. Absolutely. Right. We're always asking about the veracity, the accuracy, the reliability, the validity. So there's a lot of measurement and quantitative methodologists present and not, that obviously would be playing a critical role in determining those issues, including coming up with potentially new statistical methods.
And I think we have 3 more minutes, so I have one more question.
Okay.
How do we develop models that assure the diversity and complexity of individual responses are correctly modeled by a digital twin without validating each?
They have to be validated. So everything that you go up to until that last word, it has to be validated. You cannot just collect data and not validate it. Absolutely, yeah. Because then you'll be doing a disservice. Then it goes into issues of fairness, bias, right? Oh, absolutely. No, that would be extremely dangerous. That would never happen. Those are part of the guardrails that will have to be put in place.
Well, let's take one last question from Quay, and then we're going to call it a day, because Roger's been on since 8 o'clock. So I'm sure he needs a little rest.
More please.
So one last question, Quay.
Oh, okay. So as a land
A short question, Quay. No, I'm just kidding.
As a land-grant university, Michigan State is committed to serve its local communities, right? And then many of the work that you propose takes a long time from the development, design, to the final implementation. But then, how timely do you see the results from this center can land it on the communities that we serve? That's related to my earlier question. We have a big gap in the schools, that some schools don't even have data infrastructure. And how are we looking at this AI to translate to implementation to our schools to draw some impact?
Yeah, absolutely. No, so that would be a multi-phase approach, right? This is where kind of focusing on existing AI technologies that could meet the needs of the local schools, right? That includes from our team or our collaborators, or existing research, for example, let's say with the Engage group or the Mellows, ISAT group. So using existing technologies, and if it's just a matter of a couple of tweaks, that would be easy to kind of implement locally, right? So there's the immediate, the midterm, coming up with a midterm plan, right? There could be other plans, and then kind of long-term plans. So anytime we collaborate, especially with K-12, right, we always, when we meet with either the superintendent or the principal, and then eventually the teachers, is always to come up with what can we do now, can we do, for example, within this year, and what is it that you have a vision for that we can plan. And then once we know that, we can align that with the vision goals and set some priorities. Yeah. But it's not to make them wait years.
Well, let's give Roger a big hand for giving us the vision. Roger is all day with us all day tomorrow as well. So perhaps you can run across him and talk to him, or I'm sure he'll entertain a couple of personal, individual questions right now. But as a group, we should break up. You'll notice that there are some lovely cookies here, so if you want